I smiled through the champagne toast, pretending not to hear my mother-in-law's voice slice through the air like glass breaking. She told our guests how I climbed my way into this family, her laughter dripping with sweet poison. Cameras flashed. My cheeks burned, but not from shame. She didn't know the man standing at the edge of the room, watching quietly, was my CEO, the one who owed me everything. And when he stepped forward, every smirk in the room froze. Even Margaret's wineglass trembled, right before she choked on her first sip. That's when the real game began. The music swelled as I walked down the aisle, every step sinking into the thick ivory carpet. Golden light spilled through the glass walls, painting the guests in soft warmth. For a moment, I almost believed the day belonged to me. Daniel's eyes met mine at the altar, steady, proud, but they flicked nervously toward the front row where his mother sat. Margaret's smile was a masterpiece of poise, perfectly framed by her silk hat, but her fingers tightened around the stem of her wineglass as though she were holding back something far less graceful. The ceremony passed like a dream, all vows and laughter, until the reception began. We stood together for the first toast. Margaret rose from her seat, her diamonds catching the light like shards of ice. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice honeyed, "I must tell you about the first time I met Emily. Such a spirited young woman." I knew the cadence. She was setting a trap. She went on, painting a picture of me as a clumsy 20-something waitress who shattered a $1,000 bottle of wine and nearly cost her boss his business. The crowd chuckled politely. I didn't move, didn't blink, only raised my glass as if her story were nothing but an amusing anecdote. Then, crash. From the bar at the far end of the room, the sound of glass shattering rang out. The chatter stilled. My eyes found hers. I didn't need words. Her smirk faltered for the briefest second. In truth, her tale was a distortion. I had broken a bottle, yes, but the night it happened, I'd stayed after hours to help the owner rebuild his stock. He kept the restaurant afloat for another decade because of the distributor I connected him with. Margaret didn't know that part. She didn't care. She wanted an audience for my humiliation, and she had it. Or so she thought. The band played on, waiters weaving between tables, but I caught sight of something Margaret didn't. Grit. Across the dance floor, a young guest held his phone high, the glowing red dot of a live stream app unmistakable. I heard my name ripple in whispers, then saw the flicker of comments scrolling on his screen. People were already dissecting her story in real time, many siding with me without even knowing the truth. Sympathy, once sparked, spreads quickly online. Daniel leaned in. "Ignore her," he murmured. Easy advice, impossible to follow. I excused myself under the pretense of checking on the dessert table, moving toward the rear doors where the catering staff passed in and out. And that's when I saw him. Tall, broad-shouldered, his tailored black suit absorbing the light. He wasn't part of the wedding party and no one else seemed to notice him. For half a heartbeat, his gaze locked with mine. I let the corner of my mouth curve upward, a silent acknowledgement. Margaret, oblivious, carried on with her performance at the head table. She laughed with Daniel's cousins, gesturing toward me from time to time, and each time her voice seemed to carry just enough for the nearby microphones to catch. The live stream would hear it all. Back in my seat, I slid my hand into the clutch resting on my lap. The ivory envelope inside was heavier than paper alone. It carried the weight of a promise. My fingers brushed the smooth surface, tracing the bold signature of CEO Alexander Blackwell. Beneath it, in his sharp, unmistakable handwriting, were 2 words: "Be ready." Margaret raised her glass again, preparing for another round of barbed storytelling. I felt the steady thrum of my own pulse, not with dread, but with the measured anticipation of a chess player seeing the board 3 moves ahead. She thought this night was hers. She thought she was winning. I smiled because I knew something she didn't. The man in the black suit wasn't just a guest. He was my ally, my debt unpaid, my quiet storm waiting at the edge of the room. And soon, very soon, Margaret would learn what it meant to underestimate me in front of an audience. I let the room think I had shrunk into myself. Shoulders slightly hunched, a polite smile plastered across my face. I moved through the reception as though I were just another ornament in Margaret's grand display. It was a role I'd perfected in other rooms, other wars, knowing when to seem harmless so no one noticed the knife under the table. The live stream was still going. Every so often, I caught sight of a stranger's phone screen lit up with comments. Poor bride. She looks so sweet. That mill is savage. Girl, blink twice if you need help. Sympathy bloomed like wildfire, a current running beneath the laughter and clinking glasses. Margaret had no idea she was feeding my advantage. I drifted near the dessert station, selecting a strawberry tart I had no intention of eating, when I overheard Margaret's voice. She stood with her brother, a man whose suit fit like an afterthought, his belly pressing against the buttons. "The land deal will be signed by next month," she whispered, leaning close enough that her pearl earring brushed his collar. "Daniel will handle it. Emily won't see a dime. She's not on the paperwork, and she won't be." Her brother grunted in satisfaction. "Best to keep it in the family." My gaze stayed fixed on the tart, but inside something cold and clean locked into place. This wasn't just about petty insults. It was about erasing me from the foundation of my own marriage. She moved on without noticing me, sweeping toward a group of silver-haired ladies to spin another story. I took a seat at the far end of the patio, the evening air cool against my skin, and slipped my phone from my clutch. I didn't need to search for the property. I'd already seen the blueprints months ago. The land wasn't just valuable, it was strategic. The kind of parcel that could make or break the expansion of half a dozen businesses in the county. I also knew something Margaret didn't. The investment fund I advised had been eyeing it for weeks. The moment my name came up in the internal meeting, I'd kept quiet. I wanted to see where this would lead. And now, here it was. The dagger she thought she'd drive into me, sitting squarely in my palm. Inside, the man in the black suit stood by the bar, speaking to no one, his hands folded behind him. Alexander Blackwell had a way of owning space without ever needing to raise his voice. Years ago, in a boardroom under siege, I'd saved him from losing a deal that would have gutted his company. He told me then, "One day, I'll return the favor. Just say the word." Tonight, he wasn't here for champagne. He was here for me. But fate, it seemed, had brought a second piece onto the board. Across the room, near the string quartet, I spotted a familiar profile. Sharp jawline, easy grin, the kind of charisma that had once almost tempted me into a different life. Nathan Hale. The man who'd proposed to me in Paris under a sky lit by fireworks. I'd said no, knowing we wanted different futures. He'd left without a word. And now, here he was, laughing with a group of investors I recognized from industry events. Nathan wasn't the sentimental type. He was here for business. And if I knew Nathan, he'd already heard whispers about the land. The chessboard shifted in my mind. Blackwell was my owed favor. Nathan was an unpredictable wild card. Margaret? She didn't even know the game had started. I opened a new message thread. Now, I typed, one word. Sent to Blackwell. Across the room, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then lifted his gaze to mine. No nod, no smile, just a slow, deliberate movement as he set his glass down and began to walk. Margaret kept laughing, oblivious. Alexander Blackwell's entrance was the kind of moment cameras were built for. The double doors to the reception hall opened wide, and in he walked. Dark suit, tailored to perfection, silver cufflinks flashing as if even the light bent toward him. The chatter died in ripples, replaced by the electric hum of recognition. Every guest with a phone had it raised within seconds. Margaret was mid-laugh, one hand on her wine glass, when her gaze landed on him. The sound caught in her throat before she could stop it. A choking gasp that sent a few drops of red wine staining the front of her cream silk jacket. She coughed once, twice, then froze entirely as Alexander strode past Daniel, past the head table, and came directly to me. "Emily, he said, his voice carrying easily over the music, warm but commanding. And then, without hesitation, he wrapped his arms around me. The cameras flashed like a sudden summer storm. Gasps rose from every direction. A woman near the cake whispered, "Is that the Alexander Blackwell?" Another voice followed, "Why is he hugging the bride?" I stepped back just enough to meet his eyes. "You made it." "Wouldn't miss it," he said, but his tone told a longer story. In that moment, the months of waiting, of smiling through Margaret's subtle jabs, unfolded in my mind like a film reel. The first time I overheard her talking about the land deal, the quiet meetings with Blackwell's acquisition team, the decision to keep my name far from the paperwork until the exact right day. Blackwell turned to the crowd. "I hear there's someone I need to thank for making our latest venture possible." His gaze slid, deliberate as a blade, toward Margaret. "Margaret, would you care to join us for a quick chat?" Her lips parted, searching for a polite refusal. But every camera in the room was already pointed her way. She stood, shoulders squared, and followed him to a small table, set slightly apart from the main seating area. I remained where I was, letting the anticipation build. Guests leaned toward one another, whispering theories. The livestream chat was scrolling so fast, the words blurred. Margaret sat across from Blackwell, smiling that society page smile, but her hand trembled just enough for me to notice. I didn't need to hear their conversation. I knew its shape. He'd tell her about the fund's interest in the land. He'd mention that my involvement made the deal not only likely, but inevitable. And he'd let her connect the dots, that her private coup was about to be swallowed whole by someone she couldn't manipulate. From across the room, I caught Nathan watching, one eyebrow raised as though he'd stumbled into the third act of a play without reading the first two. His expression said he wanted in. I made a mental note. Later. When Blackwell and Margaret stood, the applause was polite but puzzled. She had managed to maintain her composure, but a slight stiffness in her smile betrayed the truth. She swept back to the head table, resuming her post as though nothing had happened. Daniel reached for her hand, clearly trying to steady her, but she brushed him off. I could see the questions building in his eyes. The music resumed, but the air had shifted. The guests sensed something, though they couldn't name it. The live stream numbers ticked higher. Margaret, sensing the need to reclaim control, rose again to make another toast. "I think it's time," she announced, "to share a little about our family's future. Daniel will soon be finalizing an important property acquisition." Her voice was smooth, confident, but she didn't realize the microphones around the stage had been left on from Blackwell's brief speech. Nor did she notice the portable mics clipped to the floral arrangements for the videographer's convenience. I walked closer, staying just at the edge of the crowd, pretending interest in the buffet. That's when I heard it. Low, venomous, meant only for me, but carried straight into every live feed. "I don't care who you bring into this," she said, her smile fixed on the guests. "I won't let you win, little girl." A few heads turned. She realized too late the words had traveled. The nearest phone screen flashed a burst of capital letter comments. "OMG, did she just—" Everyone heard that, right? Daniel's glass slipped from his hand, landing with a muted thud on the tablecloth. His jaw worked as if searching for words, but none came. I stayed silent, letting the moment hang. Sometimes, silence is the sharpest blade. The room buzzed with murmurs, the energy tilting hard away from Margaret. She looked at me then, truly looked, as if seeing me for the first time. And in her eyes, I recognized something new. Not disdain, not even hatred, but the dawning realization that she'd stepped into a game she didn't understand. The music played on. Cameras clicked. The live stream count soared past 200,000 viewers, and in the middle of it all, Margaret stood, poised and smiling, her words still echoing for the entire digital world to replay at will. I didn't answer Margaret's threat. Instead, I stepped forward, my voice carrying over the murmurs. "Since we're talking about the future," I said, there's something I'd like to share." I felt every lens in the room swing toward me. Blackwell moved to my side, the quiet signal that this was no improvisation. "Tonight isn't just about a marriage," I continued. "It's about partnership. I'm proud to announce that the Horizon Investment Fund," I paused, letting the name hang in the air, "will be entering a strategic alliance with Blackwell Corpios to invest in sustainable development across the county." A ripple went through the room. Guests looked from me to Blackwell, then back to Margaret. She froze, her expression betraying a single flicker of panic before the cameras caught her smiling again. Blackwell leaned in, adding for the crowd's benefit, "The first project in this alliance will be the development of a very special property, one I believe some of you are already familiar with." Or his gaze lingered on Margaret just long enough for the implication to sink in. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then swelling as the weight of the announcement settled. The first to stand was Senator Harlan, a man whose endorsement could turn or break entire business circles. Others followed, CEOs, philanthropists, even Daniel's usually stoic uncle. From the corner of my eye, I saw phones rise higher, the glow of live broadcasts turning faces into halos of digital light. On TikTok, the comments exploded. One shot to the top within seconds. She just destroyed her in HD. It was screenshotted, shared, re-uploaded before I even stepped down from the small platform. Margaret's applause was the slowest to start, her hands meeting as though she had to think about each movement. But the cameras drank in her smile, the warmth she had to feign. To refuse would have been social suicide. When the toasts ended and the music resumed, I kept my distance, giving her space to process. That space was its own kind of pressure. Every guest who came to congratulate me was another reminder that she was no longer the gravitational center of this family's orbit. Later, as the reception thinned and the champagne softened the edges of conversation, Margaret disappeared into the hallway. I followed at a measured pace, finding her at the far end, phone in hand, face tight. "You've been busy," she said without looking up. "The Horizon Fund, that's yours." I didn't answer. Her silence stretched before she finally looked at me, eyes narrowing. "You're the Whisper." The name landed like a stone in still water. Years ago, before my marriage, I'd been the anonymous strategist hired to dismantle a rival empire, one that had nearly merged with Margaret's company. The tactics had been clean, legal, but devastating. No one had ever traced them to me. Until now. Her voice was low, almost admiring. "You're the reason Whitmore Industries collapsed." I met her gaze steadily. "And you're the reason this company still has a chance. Horizon's investment will keep you solvent, Margaret, but it comes with oversight." Her breath caught, the realization sharp in her features. "Oversight," she repeated, "meaning control." I didn't need to confirm it. We both knew the truth. She still had her company in name, but the reins were in my hands now. Back in the ballroom, the music swelled again, guests unaware that the real transaction of the night had just taken place in a quiet corridor. Margaret returned to the party, her smile back in place, but her movement slower, as though each step cost her something. I rejoined Daniel, accepting congratulations with a grace I'd spent years cultivating. My victory was measured, precise, and incomplete. Because even as I stood there, the taste of triumph warm on my tongue, I knew what it had cost. Whatever chance there had been for peace between us. By the following week, my name was everywhere. Business journals praised my strategic genius. Wedding blogs dissected my poised public takedown, and social media turned clips of the reception into trending audios. In some corners, I was a hero. In others, I was a villain in a silk gown. Daniel scrolled through the headlines over breakfast, the faint crease between his brows deepening with each swipe. "You enjoy this, don't you?" he said without looking up. "I enjoy winning," I replied. He set his phone down. Winning what, Emily? Against my mother? Against half the county? I didn't answer. It wasn't just against Margaret. It was for my own survival in a world where one wrong move could erase me completely. The first sign of collateral damage came in the form of a phone call from Daniel's cousin, whose position in Margaret's company had been cut during a restructuring funded by Horizon. Then another cousin. Then an old family friend. By the end of the month, a handful of people who'd toasted us at the wedding were out of work, and every one of them blamed me. At the next family dinner, the air was tight enough to choke on. No one said my name directly, but every question about the company was laced with accusation. I held my ground, but the whispers followed me out the door. The final blow landed one quiet evening in our kitchen. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching me as if I were a stranger. "Do you still see this as a marriage?" he asked slowly, "or is it just another battlefield?" The question landed heavier than any insult Margaret had ever thrown. I wanted to say it was both. I wanted to say it was neither. But the truth was more complicated than either answer would allow. Before I could speak, my phone buzzed. Blackwell. I stepped into the study and answered. Alexander. His tone was almost cheerful. The market's reacting exactly as we predicted. And with your oversight, we can push for full control over the sector in 6 months. Something cold settled in my stomach. Full control? Of course, he said, as if it were obvious. That was the plan, wasn't it? It hadn't been my plan. I'd wanted to defend my position, secure stability. But Blackwell's vision was total domination. And I realized, with a clarity that stole my breath, that he'd been using my feud with Margaret as a lever all along. We ended the call politely, but my mind was already racing. The deal was too far along to untangle without consequences. 2 days later, the betrayal came from a direction I hadn't expected. My oldest friend, Claire, called to confess in a trembling voice that she'd sold a personal insight piece to a gossip magazine. They offered more than I make in a month, she said. And they had screenshots already. I just filled in the gaps. I closed my eyes. Screenshots of what? There was a pause before she admitted. Your texts with Blackwell and the meeting notes from last quarter. When the article dropped, it was worse than I imagined. Full-page spreads of me in my wedding dress alongside excerpts of private strategy messages. They painted me as a calculating opportunist who'd engineered my own marriage for leverage. Daniel didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He just stood in the doorway of our bedroom that night, suitcase at his feet. She's my mother, he said. I can't watch you tear her apart anymore. She's been tearing me apart since the day we met, I said, but the words sounded small. He shook his head, picked up the suitcase, and walked out without looking back. The sound of the door closing was sharp enough to echo. I sat on the edge of the bed, the silence around me too loud. My victory had turned to ash. The headlines, the deals, the applause, they all felt like paper shields in a war that had cost me more than I'd calculated. And somewhere in the city, Margaret was smiling, knowing she'd finally drawn blood. The morning after Daniel left, the city skyline looked sharper, almost hostile through my office window. Blackwell's latest proposal sat on my desk, its glossy cover proclaiming full market consolidation. At the bottom was a line for my signature. I read it once, twice, and then pushed it away. Somewhere between the wedding and this moment, I'd stopped recognizing the person I was becoming. Power had been the goal, but not this kind. Power stripped of purpose, steeped in someone else's ambition. When I called Blackwell, he sounded amused. Cold feet, Emily? Not cold, I said. Clear, I'm out. A pause, then a dry chuckle. You're walking away from the top seat in the industry. I'm walking away from becoming you, I replied, and ended the call. By the end of the week, the withdrawal was public. Headlines speculated about my mysterious change of heart. Some painted it as defeat. Others guessed at backroom politics. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I redirected my focus to something I'd been sketching in the margins of my life for years, a foundation for women starting their own businesses. The Phoenix Fund launched in a modest co-working space downtown, but the announcement went viral within hours. Messages poured in from women with ideas, but no access to capital, no mentors, no safety net. This was the kind of work that mattered. 2 months later, the launch event filled a restored theater, its stage lined with the first 10 women to receive funding. Cameras crowded the aisles, not for gossip this time, but for stories worth telling. As I stepped up to the podium, I scanned the room and froze. Margaret was standing at the back, her posture regal, her eyes unreadable. She waited until the applause died down before making her way forward. Conversations hushed as she climbed the steps to the stage. I stepped aside, uncertain of her intent. She took the microphone with a composure that made the audience lean in. "I came here today for one reason," she began, "to say I misjudged Emily Parker." The words hung in the air, met with a murmur of surprise. I saw her as a threat when I should have seen her as an ally. That was my mistake. Polite applause followed, though the undercurrent in the room was one of cautious curiosity. Was this genuine contrition or a calculated move to reposition herself beside something the public loved? Margaret handed the mic back to me. Our eyes met briefly, hers sharp, assessing, mine steady. I turned to the audience. The Phoenix Fund isn't about me. It's about every woman who's been told she doesn't belong in the room where decisions are made. Today, we start breaking those doors down. The applause this time was full, rising in waves that filled the theater. After the event, we stood together near the stage, smiling for photographs. To anyone watching, it looked like reconciliation. "Do you mean it?" I asked quietly, still facing the cameras. Her lips curved faintly. "Does it matter? You've already won." I smiled, not because of her words, but because I knew she was wrong. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about changing the game so no one else had to play it the way we had. As the crowd thinned and the stage lights dimmed, I felt a rare kind of peace settle over me. I'd stepped off the battlefield without surrendering, rewritten the rules without asking permission. Whether Margaret's olive branch was real or not didn't matter. I had my work, my purpose, and the knowledge that for once I was building something no one could take from me. And somewhere out there, people were still watching, deciding for themselves if this was the final chapter or just the start of a new one.